join in. I'll have the panel here up front to answer when needed, or respond when needed, maybe better point. Well, anybody would like to kick off? Oh.
I would like to know if the panelists have a response to the following observations which Krishnamurti has made. One, that we have become addicted to thinking and trying to solve problems through thinking, whereas actually thought itself creates the problem. And so life becomes a series of problems created by thought, and then thought is again trying to solve it. And that there is a separate faculty, I don't know whether not from our memory, which is awareness, and that includes senses and observation and attention. Which we have not used because of this obsession with thinking. And thought is colored by our conditioning, and usually also centered in self-interest, as the biologists have pointed out, because that's what it thinks leads to personal comfort, pleasure, survival. But that is a false feeling that we get. That actually, if each one of us is operating out of self-interest, though that may be the biological imperative, that is what creates disaster in our lives as well as in society. So he suggests that instead of acting out of self-interest, if through awareness we can realize that we are connected to the whole, and there is no individual survival, and that self-interest leads to all kinds of complications, then we would be thinking in terms of what is good for the whole rather than only for me. So that's one, two questions perhaps. Thank you. If you can respond to that.
Okay. There's a lot to say. The distinction between thinking and perception and attention, from the point of view of a cognitive scientist, there's not a big distinction between the two. If we look at the processes that are involved in thinking and the processes that are involved in perception and attention, they're both computational processes. And the computations that are involved underlying perception are in fact greater than the processes involved perhaps in thinking. It's a tremendous amount of computational horsepower that's going on there. So a first reaction from a scientist would be to say that from a scientific point of view, thinking as just a cognitive process versus perception and attention as a cognitive process, there's not a big distinction. Both are very sophisticated computational processes. Visual perception and visual attention together take up about a third of your brain's cortex. So literally a third of your 86 billion neurons are engaged in the simple process of opening your eyes and looking around. Tremendous amount of, so that's trillions of synapses, more compute power than most supercomputers is involved in just you opening your eyes without thinking and just being visually aware. It's incredibly, so for us it feels effortless. And so we assume it is effortless, but that's an illusion. It's the most sophisticated and most computationally intensive thing you ever do, is simply open your eyes and without thinking about it, just being aware of what's around you. Incredible amount of computations involved in that. So there must be a different level at which Krishnamurti must be talking about this than that one, right? And I think that there is a level at which the scientist might actually then want to engage with him and try to see what he might be trying to tell us. So it's not that the one involves just being with what is and there's no computation involved. There's tremendous computation. But it might be that the thinking part can be overdone in the sense that why did we evolve the ability to think things through? Well, it's very adaptive for us to not just stumble through life. I mean, if I've gone by that bear den before and the bear came out and mauled me, but I survived, I should probably be thinking things through before I go past that bear den again. I mean, so thinking like that is very, very important. Or if I'm in a social situation and something I said turned out not to go over very, very well, I should probably think that through and say, okay, well, how was I insensitive and so forth. But so there's the physical thing, there's also the psychological thing where I need to ruminate a bit about what I did right and what I did wrong in social situations so that I'll be more appropriate next time around. And in that case, again, a certain amount of rumination is very, very helpful. It keeps you socially, appropriate. But again, too much where you just beat yourself up all night because you said one thing wrong during the day before, that's not appropriate. And that could be where thinking. So again, I think from a scientist's point of view, we wouldn't necessarily want to say that thinking is just simply bad. It's too much thinking becomes dysfunctional, and also too little thinking becomes dysfunctional. There is something in that Krishnamurti says about thinking that I, as a scientist, reacted negatively against. But again, I'll put out my point of view, and maybe there's something deep that I'm missing on this. And he said that nothing creative can come out of thought. And what scientists say about this kind of thing, for example, Noam Chomsky, who's one of the world's greatest linguists and so forth. So he's the world's expert about language and language of thought and so forth. And he points out one of his big points against Skinner and the behaviorists was that language and that kind of thinking is an incredibly creative process in the following sense. We have a finite set of words, 30,000, 40,000 words. We have a finite set of rules, the syntax of language, syntax of thought. And from that, I can create an infinite variety of sentences, an infinite variety of thoughts. One of the key things in the cognitive revolution that really transitioned psychology from the behaviorism that ruled psychology from the 1920s through the 1960s was Chomsky's understanding of the incredible creativity of language, that there's an infinite number of sentences that you could utter, an infinite number of sentences that you could understand, including an infinite number you've never heard before. So and you can utter sentences that have never once before been uttered, like the one I just uttered, right? That's a brand new sentence, probably, maybe it's been uttered, but the chances are it hasn't been. And you had no trouble understanding it. And this is sort of, from a cognitive scientist point of view, and certainly from Chomsky's point of view, prima facie evidence that language and thinking can be really creative. So there may be a deeper sense, and one reason I'm putting this out there is because, in some sense, I'm asking, what is the deeper sense? I think there might be one in which Krishnamurti is saying that thinking and language is not a creative process. So there's this well-received sense in which it is. There may be, and I think there probably is, a deeper sense that Krishnamurti is pointing to. So by me pointing to what he couldn't be talking about, maybe we could get our fingers on what he was talking about. And now that I've said that, I would love to have someone who knows Krishnamurti better than me try to, do you want to take that on, or?
Wait.
call it out-of-the-box thinking. We call it out-of-the-box thinking, so it's not within the field of the known, but something the human consciousness is capable of not just putting two things known together and creating X plus Y, but the creativity that is free from all the past assumptions. Let's put it that way, like any major scientific discovery, say Einstein's discovery that space and time are connected. The question came from thinking, but the perception that the two could be connected was not a result of the classical thinking. So how does that out-of-the-box thinking happen? I think that's the kind of creativity Krishnamurti is perhaps talking about, yeah.
Okay, so I'll then again respond to how scientists would think about that, just again to see what you'd see from us, but then there may be a deeper. So most psychologists would say we do understand this out-of-the-box thinking in the following sense, and it's actually well studied by psychologists, where we will give our subjects certain problems to solve. And we set up the problem where when the subject hears the problem, they have a certain set, a way that they're thinking about the problem, a set of assumptions that they're making. So for example, in one case, you give a person a box with some thumbtacks in it. And you give them a candle. And you say, so given these thumbtacks and this candle, we'd like you to pin the candle on the wall, on this wall, in such a way that when you light it, wax won't get onto the floor. So and that's all good. So here's this box of thumbtacks, here's a candle, pin the candle to the wall in such a way that you won't get wax dripping down when you light the candle. And most people just scratch their heads and think about it and they try to stick tacks through the candle into the wall and they break the candle, and still when they light it is. And the thing to think out of the box, very few people realize you can take the box, dump the thumbtacks out of it, put the candle in the box, tack the box to the wall, and then and you use the box. So you thought about the box just as the container for the thumbtacks. You didn't think about it in this other way. I could use the box. So the question is the aha experience. So psychologists study this aha experience, and the idea typically is that we have these prior assumptions that are built into us that have constrained the solution space that we're looking through. But if you let go for a minute and relax, then you might be able to move to a different part of the solution space, a new way. So the best model that scientists have for creativity is something we would call generate and test. Generate and test. You have a random generation of ideas, and most of them are utterly worthless. But you test them. And most of them you can look at, well, that's a bad idea. I mean, if you think about most of your ideas, and if you were being honest, most of my ideas are really bad. But every once in a while, if I have enough of them, one of them's good, and then of course that's the one I tell you about. That's in fact, so you think I'm really sharp. That's the one. But that's the only real model we have of creativity, is a generate and test kind of model. So now if Krishnamurti is pointing to a deeper kind of creativity, and he may be, then he'd be pointing to something that I as a scientist have no tools to deal with, right? Because the only tools I have to deal with right now are a generate and test kind of thing. But we do have tools to deal with these things where you get ideas that are a surprise to you. I can still deal with that in a generate and test. So that's why I wanted to bring that up. That's not a problem for science. But this other thing where you say, no, there is a creativity that's beyond generate and test, that is a stunner if that's the claim to scientists. That would be a real stunning thing to us, and we would want to hear more, as much as we could, about that, because we'd like to learn about that. So I don't know if that.
And the other question was narrow self-interest.
Yes.
Realizing that my self-interest is not separate from that of all the others, and therefore thinking, right. I mean, in a way that's out of the box, because in the box thinking is self-centered.
Right. So the big insight that Hamilton had in the early 1960s on this. Is called inclusive fitness. And it is the modern evolutionary theory of altruism. Under what conditions will I actually put your interests on a par with mine? And maybe even do something for you that might cost me my life. And we can Hamilton actually can write down an equation. He did. If the cost in fitness to me is less than the benefit to you, discounted by the degree of our genetic relatedness. So for example, if you're my brother, then you share 50% of your genes with me. So if the benefit to you is twice the cost to me, then it turns out, you can look at the logic of evolution, evolution can shape an altruistic urge in you to do something for your brother if the benefit to your brother is at least twice the cost to you. But for a cousin who is related, I don't know, what, a quarter or an eighth, I've forgotten. Is it a quarter? An eighth. So the benefit to my cousin needs to be 8 times the cost to me for me to be willing to do it. And so this literally makes quantitative predictions about the degree to which I'm willing to do things. And you can test this. How long am I willing to hold my breath for somebody? Depends on how closely related. And when you do the experiments, you find out that the length that you'll hold your breath is predicted by Hamilton's law. So there is in evolution. So now again, I'm not saying that this is everything that there is at all to say about, being kind to others and so forth. I'm just saying that evolution and inclusive fitness has this, for the first time in human history, a mathematically precise model that makes predictions about when and to whom you will be altruistic. And it seems to work. Given that we don't have any other precise models that make clean predictions, it's all we've got. So right now, the state of human understanding on this in terms of science is we have one theory, and only one theory, that's mathematically precise and that makes clean prediction. It doesn't mean that it's right. And by the way, I should put up front, I'm a scientist. I don't think any of our current scientific theories are correct, including mine. But they're the best tools we've got. So I think all of our theories are wrong, including mine, but they're better than no theories. Because at least with a theory, we can begin to then see what it predicts and try to, revise the theory, evolve the theory, and get better theories. I think in principle we could come up with true theories. I just don't think we've done it yet. So my attitude about this is, I think most scientists would say, look, we have a theory about altruism, and we make clean predictions about when we'll be altruistic. And also we can make clean predictions about how we can set up social and political institutions to bring out more of the altruistic behaviors and to less often trigger the dark sides of human nature. But those dark sides are also absolutely essential to our survival. I'll just give you one, and then I should pass off. Why is it that we have, when someone, say, hurts your daughter or steals something from you, that many of us feel this implacable urge for revenge, that it's almost unreasonable. I will go to any lengths to track you down at any cost to myself, way out of proportion to what you did to me even, perhaps, to come back and get, why is that often in human nature, that implacable desire for revenge? And it turns out if you do an evolutionary analysis, prior to governments and police forces and so forth, what was the only way that you could actually have a credible threat against someone who might attack your family? If there was a doomsday machine built inside of you, such that if someone comes and attacks, say, your daughter, and attacks your daughter, that something goes off inside of you that makes you irrational, willing to sacrifice your life at any cost to pay him back. If that guy knows there's a doomsday machine inside of you, he's now going to think twice before he attacks your daughter. But if he doesn't, if that doomsday machine is just a pretend doomsday, if it's not real, then he can come and attack your family with impunity. So evolution, so the theory is evolution built into us this doomsday mechanism. If someone hurts me in the right way, I will find myself unable to control myself. I have to go. So that's built into us, and it was absolutely necessary. But when you have a police force and a government with an army, that's no longer required. Right? We say, no, you don't administer justice. Let us, someone who is an impartial third party. And in fact, if you try to administer justice, we'll put you in jail too. So we set up a situation where we turn off this evolutionary mechanism. So we still have it in us. The mechanism is still there. But, and in war zones, like in the Middle East, we see the results of it. We're going to attack you, now we're even. Well, no, now we're not even, we need to attack you back, now we're even. And you get this thing that goes on for thousands of years because this doomsday machine is inside of us. It turns out, I mean, one thing that Krishnamurti said that I will disagree with, he said it's getting worse, that the human misery is getting worse and it's actually, and a good book I recommend on this is Enlightenment Now. Enlightenment Now. And also The Better Angels of Our Nature. Enlightenment Now. By Steven Pinker. Pinker. He documents that, in fact, human homicide rates have dropped by orders of magnitude over the last few thousand years. That before we had big governments with armies and polices, because of this mechanism that I was talking about before, where we have this doomsday mechanism, if you attack me, I'll attack you, and we get in the cycle, homicide was huge back then because it's a real mechanism. Now it's dropped to less than 1% of what it was before. So in fact, now human nature hasn't changed. We are the same evolutionarily as we were thousands of years ago. What's changed is we have political situations in which we put a police force between the attacker and the victim. And the victim no longer is the one who needs to get revenge. It's the third party that's dispassionate, that's stuck. And that one thing, not changing human nature, we haven't changed, but we've disabled that feature of human nature. We're not triggering it anymore. But in situations in the world where we don't have that, where it's not stable, where there's wars going on, then you see the violence and the homicide rate is very, very high. So from a scientist's point of view, and this is Pinker's, and I highly recommend, again, Enlightenment Now, a wonderful book, and The Better Angels of Our Nature. Once you understand how human nature works and what triggers these kinds of violence, and also what triggers altruism, and we can write down equations for this, then we can literally figure out why certain societies work and how to design societies and political institutions. So it's very, very powerful. So that's the one thing, and I would love to have people push back. Again, that was the one thing that I've heard about Krishnamurti, that Krishnamurti said that I flat out disagreed with, that things are actually getting worse. Human nature is the same, and things are actually getting better. Although you can point to the world wars and so forth, even when you count the world wars from the 20th century, it turns out the homicide rates were still less than 1% of what they used to be. So I'll be happy to turn it over to someone. I don't know if we should just take
Yeah.
Use
I should let somebody else.
use my poor English. Try to understand. I think the subject, topic today is is challenging and dangerous. How about a moment? The moment we together now, and the present, right now, the moment. The moment not belongs to you or me. The moment connect everyone. We together. So how about the moment? The people look like can describe what's the freedom and what's the no and what's the unknown. But the moment, who know about it? Maybe no one know about it. The right moment, the living. living moment change every second. We together. No one know about the moment. But all our action and reaction here, now, we together, and all come from the known. And but the moment and the living moment, who can describe that clearly? Look like describe clearly. For the moment, whatever you study Krishnamurti many years, but the moment is unknown for everybody, same. The moment have no video inside, have no sentence inside, have no any person teaching and repeat something inside. So my question is, do we together sensitive about the moment we together? Honestly. Okay.
Was that a question? Yes. So you want one of them to describe the moment? Yeah? Okay. I'm gonna ask. One of you.
Corey has all the answers. What was the question? Tell us the question as you understand it first.
I don't know if I heard a direct question, but what I think I heard you pointing to was that we're discussing a lot and we're here. And being here now, yes, I would agree that there's an ineffability about our existence and our being here. Ineffability. But what I would say is that I don't know quite how to answer your question. I don't know what exactly we should describe. But what I think we're attempting to do here is, and I think it's related to the first question, we're living, thinking beings. And we aren't sure we know how to live. We also aren't sure if, as thinking beings, we even understand the right place for thinking and its implications for our lives. So I feel like in a way that's a part of what we're doing here today is to sort of try and understand who it is and what it is that we are and how it is that we function in the world. So I don't necessarily want to deny, I'm not quite sure what you were asking, but yeah, sure. Yeah, so that question is difficult because why are you interested in living in the moment? What are you going to get from the moment? Well, are you sure? Because I mean it. I mean it in a real way, in the sense that I think that it's difficult because we've been conditioned by like spiritual pursuits to assume that the moment has something special in it that we're missing. And that may not be the case. We may or may not be, but if we assume we're missing awareness, we're going to start looking for awareness. But that's a pursuit so I guess the question is not what are we missing in the moment, but what is it in us that demands something of the moment that we aren't experiencing now? What is it that's not here that we want? And that wanting is very important. That seems to be the thing. That seems to be the thing that is the root of some kind of suffering, and that seems to be the root of this danger in knowledge, is that there's something that we feel we don't have, even if it is in this moment. And that defines a lot of our lives. So it doesn't define our lives only in spiritual pursuits, but in any domain. So I'm not intentionally trying to totally deny that question, but it's more to use that question to point out. I think that's exactly the point. So why this kind of conversation is even interesting is that even we've been conditioned, particularly recently, and even in the way that we look at Krishnamurti's work, to assume that we're missing something profound this moment. But how do we look at that, and what are we missing? Because we ask questions like, why aren't we here now? Well, no, I'm just saying. Yeah. Do you see? I don't. Yes, I agree, but also it's.
Corey,
Yeah.
because also there was a question here.
Yeah. Sure.
I wanna
Yeah.
make sure
Yeah.
some justice to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a couple unrelated questions. The first question has to do with something that was brought up earlier about perception, particularly in terms of maybe emotions, like anger or something like that. And that Krishnamurti says that it's just anger. There is no one being angry, the I part of it. And I know just from some reading and from my own experiences, really when I look at emotion like that, there is no I. The only I that comes in is me projecting what I think is a stream of consciousness backwards and forwards, but not in the moment that I'm actually experiencing it. So that's the first question. The second question is a little bit more difficult to describe. One of the things that I've seen in watching Krishnamurti over in his reading his books and his interviews and in his talks is that it's extremely difficult for him, it appears, to get some of his points across about people genuinely trying to experience what he's describing rather than intellectually conceptualizing what he's. One of the questions I have is, could there be something about Krishnamurti and about enlightened beings who have been on the planet and been described from the very beginning that somehow genetically or epigenetically permits them to alter the way that they perceive things that most of us can't, because they have an inherent ability to do that. And it's not necessarily something that can be taught or something that can be transferred in any kind of a conventional way. And what it does is allows them to perhaps suspend the models that Don was talking about in certain instances in their life to be able to do that. And I'm wondering if that's just not available to others, just like, you know, I can't run the 100-meter dash in, you know, the same way that world-class sprinters can do it. And the second question is even a little bit more trickier. Is that just a different perception of reality? No more or less accurate of reality than are our models. It's just a different perception of reality. And that none of us really know what reality is, because whether we're interpreting it through the conventional way that humans tend to do it, or through unconventional ways such as Krishnamurti or the Buddha, it's still an interpretation of reality.
Okay. I forgot your first question, but I'll respond to the second one. So, so there's just, I mean, I can't answer most of it, but I mean, as I'm sure you'll agree, there's obviously no objective or agreed upon criteria as to who's enlightened and who's not. But be that as it may, even if one accepts that X, Y, and Z were quote unquote enlightened, we don't, as you probably know, have any genetic or epigenetic material to compare with others. So there's no answer in that regard. But your question about whether, not just that, but whether any ability is available to everyone or not is interesting and sort of I think deserves a little bit of thinking. So there's attributes. One can think of attributes at a species level. So all humans have 4 limbs and 2 eyes, and those are just attributes of humans by virtue of belonging to that species. And then there are what in science they use the term individual differences. So some have more of an attribute than the others. Some are taller than others, some are run faster and this and that. So so one obligatory process by which evolution works, if one wants to call it that, is 2 things. One, a generation of variation within a species that's random. So first of all, that implies that there could not be something identical in any attribute across individuals within a species, but there has to be variation. And then there's a selection by local conditions for fitness. So what that implies then, and you already touched on part of the answer, is that you said you couldn't run 100 meters in 10 seconds. And very few people can, right? But we know that some can. So running 100 meters in 10 seconds is within the realm of human possibility, and we know that because it's been done. But surely you wouldn't go around saying to everybody that just because one human could do that, so can you. That would be kind of absurd to go around saying to everyone in this room that it's in the realm of human possibility, so you can do it too. And then there's something else, which is, can a human run 100 meters in 3 seconds instead of 9 point something, which is the world record? And you would dismiss that question out of hand. You would say that's not even worth investigating. That's absurd. That's beyond absurd, because there are certain limitations of the musculoskeletal system that preclude a human from ever transporting herself or himself 100 meters in less than 3 seconds. That's beyond absurd, that question. Don't spend any time thinking about it, reflecting on it, pondering, making an attempt. So I'm not sure that I'm really responding to what you said, but is this notion of enlightenment as absurd as the 3 second? Is it the 10 second? Is it something that every single person could readily have if X, Y, Z, but it's, it's so obvious? Obviously I don't have an answer to that, but I'd like to frame the question in some sort of notion like that.
And there's, in addition to Patik's good point, I think there's another one, and there's been some work that probably everybody here knows about with microdosing with drugs, right? And William James famously did some nitrous more than a century ago and was blown away by what he experienced under nitrous. They didn't have LSD back then, and they didn't have ketamine and so forth. And he said that what he discovered was that what we take to be reality is separated by a very, very flimsy film from all sorts of other variations of reality that we'd never even imagined that were out there. And he, with one experience of nitrous, was opened up to that. So, and Michael Pollan has a book, I've forgotten the title of it, it's a fairly new book, Michael Pollan, if you, P-O-L-L-A, if you look it up. He has a book that explains the current state of play in using microdosing of ketamine and LSD and other drugs to actually help people to move into these other kinds of experiences temporarily, which then loosen the grip of this on our imagination. And at least one way of thinking about what we mean by enlightenment is to just see this as not the final reality. This is just a virtual reality. And in some sense, enlightenment is being willing to take the VR helmet off, the VR headset off, and realize this is just a VR headset, and it's not the only way that you could see the world. And in that sense of enlightenment, these drugs do help people to let go of the grip of this, space-time and physical objects, on the imagination. And so that I think is a place where the results suggest that anybody can go there with the right. By the way, I'm not proposing to, okay, I'm not proposing anything illegal or anything like that. But I am saying that under proper scientific control and careful situations and so forth, that it might be possible for us to help people to let go of this. And so that might be another direction. But a rejoinder to me might be, that's not what I mean by enlightenment. There's something deeper. And if that's the case, I would be very interested to hear what is meant by enlightenment other than letting go of the grip of space-time and physical objects on my imagination. If there's something deeper, I would love to hear. Right.
Yeah, just quickly, I think it's also, and it's not necessarily contrary to any of what's been said, but it's more to add to it that there's a certain element of that I think just like sort of basic humanity that can be involved in something like this, to say that there may be people that are capable of having very intense kinds of experiences that others aren't. But that doesn't mean that there still isn't the capacity for, there may still be capacities that we don't necessarily know to avail ourselves of just learning how to understand who we are and how to live our lives in a way that is meaningful and valuable to humanity as a whole. That somehow, I don't think that it's restricted to a small few to have profound experiences, to just speak loudly about those experiences to convince all of us that there's more. The more may be something so simple that it doesn't require some profundity like that. It's more, we just have to sort of avail ourselves of our humanity. It's like the reverse. We could also very well take drugs and experience all kinds of things, but what would that actually do to your life? For many people, nothing. So I don't think the question really is about strange experiences, because we could all chase those. It's something more simple, like how is there a right place for thinking, and how do we relate to one another? What does it mean to be emotional? And how do I relate to those things? It's so basic that we almost forget that we are these things that have all these kinds of experiences, and we don't really even know why or what they are. So it's something like that. Like there's a there's a potential for us to just, as a group, come together and say, what is it that we're doing? How do we organize as a whole society? And what does that look like? And there's something like that. There's different elements to it.
Yeah, I'd like to add something that's more to a previous discussion. Because you said, hey, well, can we push back? I mean, first a little bit in your response to the question of Professor Krishna about creativity. And you clearly had a model, or the model that you described, which seems to be the accepted model at the moment, that creativity is, how would you say, generate and test, right? Which and obviously that looks very plausible, and that's also how a computer can do it, and how a computer plays chess. But I could put one pushback there, or one corner, but because what is a mind that starts generating and testing? When does it drop its previous assumptions and start generating and testing? Yeah, so I would just say that there is still a gap there that might be significant, also for our existence, that you might always carry forward with what you know, and then at a certain moment you say, hey, I'm stuck. And now I start generating and testing, and then you come up on something new. But there's a discontinuity which might be very significant. That's what I'm just trying to say. You know. So then second, and with altruism, something similar might be the case, like that altruism obviously, and it looks very likely, can be modeled this way, does not necessarily exclude, that's what I just want to say, in order to keep opening for the discussion on that there is, that if you would say that the human mind is selfish, the human being is selfish, concerned with itself, that it might be, there might be scope for non-selfishness without even the model that you just proposed. I just want to say, so okay, so that's the two things, and then I'm an additional factor here, and that's so evolution, of course, is an unfoldment with trial and error or whatever, random variation and adaptation to environment, and in that play and that complexity, which is of course highly complex, and you know how an orchid comes into being is of course amazing out of that through trial and error, or to adaptation and random variation, or a human in itself is also of course. Now, and so, but if you look at like the human evolution, so what was so significant in the human evolution that it somehow seemed to be significantly different from the primates, for example. And although there's a huge overlap with the primate, but somehow we are able to say, well, there's a difference. We're not primate apes, right? Or big ape. So there seems to be a difference there, which we call ourselves human, and it seems to be that the difference is quite significant. And the significant might be there that there's a multitude of complexity in our language compared to that, and also which might be related to a much higher complexity in making predictions, right? So to be able to model the future, which makes that so tremendously adaptive. Most apes you can't throw on the North Pole, but humans can survive on the North Pole. So somehow there's this capability of making predictions and models that makes the human extremely adaptable to almost any place in the Earth, and even on the Moon we've been. So okay, so that's. Now, and I don't think we can close this discussion for today, but I just want to throw it out because I think it's maybe worthwhile picking up in the coming days. It could very well be that, so okay, you can say on one hand with evolution, well, there is things that remain are all significant, otherwise they wouldn't have been remained. I don't think that's true. I think some things remain even if they're not significant. So that's one thing. So because I mean, why would they go away if they're there? You know, I mean, we still have our tailbone, although it doesn't seem to be serving something, right? So so that might be a bit a whole collection of things. So features appear and disappear, and that seems to be obvious, right? We have tail, we had hair, lots of hair on our body, we had different jaws, and all of that seems to be reconfiguring itself along the way of evolutionary steps. But in the ability, the tremendous ability that came maybe from tool building or whatever, those steps, the giant leaps were made in evolution, that we adapted language and also modeling, and where we started modeling our outside, but also we started modeling our inside, where the whole notion of the narrative self seems to be an ongoing modeling of who I am, because somehow you feel angry and you want to have an anger, a model of your anger, right? So Krishnamurti says you are anger, but how we experience is that we experience is there's anger and I'm looking at my anger. So there's a model building coming in. Now, the problem might be somewhere there in that modeling of ourselves internally, of our psychological states, which is then maybe creating what they call then the narrative self, where I think maybe then the defiance or somehow points at the psychological domain where we, with Krishnamurti's work, want to look at. So I just want to throw it out there as a point for discussion now and maybe also tomorrow. I don't know what the time is, but yeah. Well, we can have maybe a short...
Yeah, no, I won't try to answer any of that, but I'll try to correct the language you used in one specific thing, because it implies something that so for example, you said, if I'm recalling correctly, what is it about human evolution that allows humans to have such and such adaptive capabilities that other species don't have? And that language itself implies a misunderstanding of evolution, and perhaps, and I'll just try to rephrase it, and that might make it a little bit clearer. So there are different organisms that have different evolutionary histories. There are some organisms that have an evolutionary history that has capabilities of being adaptable such that, you know, ABC, they can survive on the North Pole. Those happen to be called humans. So now saying it this way takes away the specialness of, you know, as if the human came first and then the human evolved. Its evolution happened on a species, and we call that human and that's something else and so on. So it's not that the human evolved, it's evolution did its thing and produced. It's the other way around. And if you don't understand that causal link, then you're always left with, well, what is so special about us, or what is so different about us? And there isn't. It's a happenstance. No, it's not became. So monkeys are still monkeys, but some changed enough that they became what we today call humans. So so that's you know, it might sound like a minor point linguistically, but it's really a major point in understanding the emergence of characteristics, and also but anyway, I'll just stop there.
Yeah, you pushed back on creativity and altruism, and then talked about humans. And so I think your pushback on creativity and altruism are actually to the point. I actually think that the best scientific models of creativity are wrong, and I think that evolution by natural selection is an incomplete theory. I mean, the reason I'm putting them out there is I have nothing better, and no one has anything better. So we have to use the best tools that we have, but I think that the idea that creativity is a generate and test thing is probably woefully inadequate. But the question is, what new theory am I going to put out there, right? So what we have to do as not only scientists, but as people who want to understand, we have to take the best theories we have so far, really understand them, and then ask, what is it about these theories that we don't like? And then try, and I should explain our motivation. Some people ask me, why in the world are you always going after this mathematics? Do you have some fetish about mathematics? What is it? And it's, I don't, and mathematics is very hard for me, and I wish I didn't have to use it, because it is really, really hard. So what I'm really after is, I don't want to play games. I want to be able to state the ideas so precisely that someone else can tell me precisely where I'm wrong. That's the whole point of science, is to be so precise that someone else can say, ah, that's where you're wrong. Then you can say, thank you, okay, now we're getting somewhere. Imprecise language gets us spinning in circles literally for thousands of years in the same sandbox. And I'm not interested in that. So I think you're right. The generate and test thing, even though it's the best model we have, I think it's woefully inadequate. The theory of altruism that I gave you, it's the best we've got. I don't think it's anywhere near what we need to have. In fact, I think the whole theory of evolution by natural selection, even though it's incredibly beautiful and it's incredibly powerful, it's the best we've got, I think we're going to find something far deeper that will overthrow it and show that that theory is a special case of a much, much deeper theory. But until we're there, we have to take very, very seriously the tools that we have, really study them. If we don't really know what we've got, but these are really incredible advances that we've made. Even though I think they're wrong, they're incredible advances. So we have to really understand them. What are these theories saying? Notice all the places where they make predictions that work, and they do. And then ask, okay, what are we asking for when we go for something deeper? And I do want to go for something deeper, right?